welcome to the Soho Forum. Thank you. And welcome to all of us, all of those who are watching us on streaming, and all of the many millions who are going to be watching this on YouTube, as well as and listening to it on podcast. Tonight's resolution reads, President Trump's deportation policies generally violate key civil liberties as set forth in the U.S. Constitution. Here for the affirmative, Glenn Greenwald. Glenn, please come to the stage. Here for the negative. Taking the negative, Anna Gorisch. Anna, please come to the stage. Glenn, you have 15 minutes to defend the resolution. I think you should take the podium. Take it away, Glenn.
Good evening, everybody, and thank you so much for coming. Thank you as well to Gene and the Soho Forum for having me back. This is the third one of these I did. The last one in person was with Professor Ellen Dershowitz about whether the United States should bomb Iran. It turned out to be a quite more relevant debate than we knew, since the United States did, in fact, go do that. Thanks as well to Reason and Nick Gillespie. It's always a pleasure to be able to have a forum like this where you can have in-depth, substantive debate rather than screaming on people online, which is, I hear, what a lot of people do these days. I'm not really sure why anyone would do that, but I hear that other people do that. So it's great to be able to have debates like these that are more substantive. So what I want to do is start in my 15 minutes of opening with talking about what it is that we're supposed to be debating, because I think it's as important to note what we're not debating. So the title, more or less, I think Gene referenced it in his opening, is whether Trump's deportation policies generally violate civil liberties as guaranteed by the U.S. Constitution. So I think it's very important to note, first of all, that when we talk about what violates the Constitution, we don't mean what the Constitution should be, in our view, what we wish the Constitution provided for and don't. We're talking about what the Constitution actually requires based on its written text and principally interpreted by the U.S. Supreme Court, which I think is extremely clear in its precedent on this question. Oftentimes, constitutionality of a particular policy can be debated reasonably on both sides. I think, at least with respect to the most egregious parts of Trump's deportation policies, there is not a lot of ambiguity or debate. I think it's very, very straightforward. Where's the timer? Is there someone timing?
He's going to give you a 5-minute warning.
Thank you. Hello, Mr. Timer. So that's what we mean by what's constitutional. And then I think it's also important to note that it doesn't have to be that all parts of Trump's deportation policies are unconstitutional. Obviously, presidents have the right and have exercised the right for many decades, in fact longer, to deport people who deportation courts find are in the United States illegally after providing the due process required by law. So there's certainly some parts of his deportation policy that are consistent with constitutional requirements. And then finally, I think it's very important that we don't get caught up in our view of the underlying policy. Is it good or bad to deport the people Trump is deporting? Are the underlying policy goals of the Trump administration desirable or not? Do you agree about whether we should drop immigrants off in the South Sudan, even if they've never been there and they're not from there, or in an El Salvador prison? I think the question is whether or not the Constitution permits what the Trump administration is doing. And I strongly believe the answer is no. The Constitution does not permit Donald Trump's deportation policies, by which I really mean the deportation policies of his that are unique to his administration. And I want to highlight two in particular that I think are plainly, blatantly unconstitutional. The first of which is his brand new policy of deporting students who are legally in the United States on student visas or work visas, or sometimes even green cards, meaning they're married to an American citizen and they're on the path to permanent citizenship, not because of any conduct that they've engaged in, not even especially because of any alleged crimes that they have committed, but simply due to their political views. and their political views, particularly as it pertains not to the United States. None of these people are being deported because they've criticized the United States or protested against the United States. That's totally permitted. Nor are they being deported for criticizing or protesting against any of the other 191 countries on the planet. Totally fine to protest against China or Iran or Norway or Uruguay or India. All that's fair game. The one thing that you cannot do under Trump's deportation policy is criticize or protest this one foreign country on the other side of the world named Israel. And I think the Supreme Court and all precedent for the last 150 or even 200 years is extremely clear that punishing anybody in the United States, legally or otherwise, citizen or not, based on their political views is exactly what the First Amendment was constructed to prevent, and that's exactly what the Trump administration has been doing. The second part of the Trump administration deportation policy that to me quite clearly violates the Constitution is the component of this deportation policy that says we can pick people up and deport them, not back to their country of origin, but to some third country. We can even deport them back to a country who we pay to throw into a dungeon, a prison, where they'll have no due process, where they may never be let out. And they don't have any due process at all. They're not advised beforehand that they're going to be deported. Some of them are here legally. Some of them are here illegally. It makes no difference. Any kind of deportation, whether it's under the normal deportation laws or under this extremist enemy alien act that Trump invoked the fourth time in American history where that was done, the first time being the War of 1812, World War I, and then World War II. So real wars. Trump declared war on Venezuela, I guess, or Nicaragua, even though there's no basis for him to do so. And then on that basis is rounding people up and sending them back with no due process whatsoever. So let me grab my glasses, because I want to read a couple of things. So I think there's a reason why the Trump administration had an expectation that they could implement such blatantly unconstitutional policies and get away with it, at least politically. And I think one of the major reasons is that there are a lot of misconceptions about what our Constitution provides, what it guarantees, and to whom it guarantees that. I think a lot of people believe, and believe me, I've heard from many of them, I've seen many of them, there's polling that indicates there are huge numbers of people in the United States who believe this, that the U.S. Constitution provides guarantees, protections, and rights only to American citizens. And therefore, if a foreign national, a non-citizen, is in the United States studying in a PhD program here legally, they have no basis of any kind to claim that their constitutional rights have been violated because they're not citizens and the Constitution isn't for them. And this is very easily dispensed with. For at least 150 years, the Supreme Court has said exactly the opposite. The Constitution, the Bill of Rights are not intended to be gifts and presents that are handed to a special group of people called American citizens. It's an instrument to constrain the U.S. government with regard to all people, U.S. citizens or not, that are under its sovereign control. It's a constraint on the government. You can go back all the way. This is not some new like Warren Court or left-wing Supreme Court invention. Go back to 1886, the case of Yik Wu versus Hopkins, where a Chinese national, a citizen of the United States, was in the United States legally. He was picked up by law enforcement, prosecuted. They claimed that he and 80 other Chinese business owners were violating regulations and zoning laws, and there were criminal offenses involved, and they were given almost no due process. The person charged, the Chinese national, sued the state of California, appealed his conviction on the grounds that his due process rights were violated, and the Supreme Court in 1886 upheld his claim, reversed his conviction, even though he was not a U.S. citizen, under the due process clause of the Constitution. And they said this, quote, "The right of the petitioners, the Chinese business holders, as affected by the proceedings of which they complain, are not less because they are aliens and subjects of the Emperor of China. The 14th Amendment to the Constitution is not confined to the protection of citizens." And then he quotes, the court quotes what it says, which is, "It shall not deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without the due process of law, nor the equal protection of the laws." And then the court says, "These provisions are universal in their application to all persons within the territorial jurisdiction without regard to any differences of race, of color, or nationality, and the equal protection of the laws is a pledge of the protection of equal laws. The question we have to consider and decide in these cases, therefore, are to be treated as involving the rights of every citizen of the United States equally with those of the strangers and aliens who now invoke the jurisdiction of the court." I don't think a Supreme Court case, especially from 1886 that I've ever read, has been as clear in its holding as that one. And there's been a ton of cases, including well-known ones, that have upheld the similar principle. In 2008, Guantanamo detainees sued the Bush administration. People held at Guantanamo under the War on Terror. Obviously, none of them was citizens. And they sued and they said, if you're going to put us into a cage for life with no charges, which is what was being done, we at least have the right to invoke the right of habeas corpus, to get into a court one time in order to contest the validity of the accusations. And the Supreme Court sided with the Guantanamo detainees who were invoking constitutional rights, even though they were non-citizens. And it was a 5-4 ruling, but all 9 justices of the court agreed, including Justice Scalia, who wrote a dissent, the conservative judges as well, that there's no question that non-citizens under U.S. government control have the absolute right to the protections of the Constitution. And the only question that they divided on was whether Guantanamo was part of U.S. sovereign land or whether it was part of Cuba. 5 justices of the court said yes, it is part of the U.S. and upheld those rights of habeas corpus. And once they got the right of habeas corpus and got into a court, many of them were able to prove the accusations against them were false and free and bereft of evidence, and that's why so many of them went free. So as recently as 2008, everybody agreed on the Supreme Court that these applied to them as well. And then there is this case, Bridges versus Wixon, where a non-citizen, an alien who entered the country in 1920 from Australia, had joined the Communist Party. And there was a law saying if you are part of the Communist Party at the time that you entered or at any time since, you can be deported. They started deportation proceedings against him. The court in 1945 said, no, you cannot deport people from the United States because of the political views they have or the political associations. The court concluded freedom of speech and of press is accorded aliens residing in this country. Now, just to give you one example of how extreme and extremely unconstitutional the Trump administration has been, there's the case of Rumaiza Ozturk, who was a PhD student at Tufts. Her crime that led to her being snatched off the street by plainclothes ICE agents was that she co-authored an op-ed in her student newspaper for Tufts that said nothing other than, we think the administration should honor the decision of the Senate faculty to divest from Israel. That's all she did. She wrote an op-ed. There's no country in the world, at least in the democratic world, that would deport people for writing an op-ed. And the district court said, I put the government on notice that they should immediately introduce any evidence, and that was 3 weeks ago, and there has been no evidence that has been introduced by the government other than the op-ed. I mean, that literally is the case. There is no evidence here as to the motivation of deportation, absent consideration of the op-ed. That's the only reason they wanted to deport her and put her into a deportation cell. And if that's a prison, and if that's not unconstitutional, deporting somebody for an op-ed that they write, that's very mild actually in its views, but even if it's radical, I really don't know what is. And then of course we have the case of Mahmoud Khalil, and I'm sure Anna is gonna have a lot to say about this case. I will just say for the moment that Mahmoud Khalil is somebody who has been in the United States for years. He is married to an American citizen. He just had a baby who is an American citizen. They chose to build their life in the United States of all the years that he's been here. Same with Ozturk as well. He has never been so much as arrested, let alone charged with a crime, let alone convicted of a crime. He has never spoken up in favor of a designated terrorist group. His only political activism has been to condemn the U.S. war, the U.S. financing of the war in Gaza, calling it a genocide, and that is the reason that he now faces deportation charges. And the final set of cases that I want to cover, the policy is, I mentioned this earlier, back in March, the Trump administration rounded up 138 residents, or rather citizens of Venezuela, and shipped them to one of the worst and most abusive prisons on the planet, which was in El Salvador, even though most of them had never been to El Salvador before, had nothing to do with El Salvador. And they were rounded up and lied to and told that they were going back to Venezuela. They had no idea they were even going to El Salvador until they got there, let alone given any due process. They weren't notified at all. Several of them were here legally, many were not. And several of them were wrongfully picked up under suspicions of gang membership because they had their tattoos misinterpreted, including a gay hairdresser who looks more like some makeup influencer on Instagram than a member of a drug gang who had his mother and his father's name tattooed on his arm with a crown that ICE thought meant he was in a gang. Same with someone who had an autism awareness tattoo because his brother is autistic, something that would have been recognized had they been able to get into a court for even a quick hearing, but they were denied that. And this went before the Supreme Court, and all 9 justices of the Supreme Court issued a ruling. And while they disagreed about where the case should be brought, that was why it was a 5-4 ruling, this is what they said as part of their majority ruling. The detainees' rights against summary removal are not in dispute. The government expressly agrees that even Trinidad members subject to removal under the Alien Enemies Act get judicial review. The detainees are entitled to notice and an opportunity to be heard appropriate to the case. For all the rhetoric of the dissents, today's order and opinion confirm the detainees subject to removal orders are entitled to notice and an opportunity to challenge their removal. The only question is what court will resolve that challenge. They did not get any due process. Others who have been removed from the United States got none either. The due process clause could not be any clearer. It says all persons, not citizens, are entitled to due process of law. The courts have been overwhelmingly clear what that means. There's a reason why no other government before the Trump administration started deporting and snatching off the street students here on a visa or a green card for their political opinions, or sending them and shipping them off to foreign dungeons without even a trial. And it's because the Constitution is extremely clear that those policies are violative of the core guarantees of the Constitution.
Thank you, Glenn. Anna Gorisch for the negative. Anna, I think you want to take the podium. Take it away, Anna.
Wow. Hello, Soho Forum. I am so honored to be here. I'm sure all 3 of my fans are here. All of you know who I am, obviously. I'm Anna Gorisch. I'm an immigration attorney. So starting with that, just to make it clear, I am in no way anti-immigration. So we're here to talk about the proposition Trump's deportation policies generally violate U.S. civil rights as laid out in the Constitution. I have some notes here. I'm going to pull these up. And while I pull these notes up, I'm going to thank some people. I would like to thank Jean, the Soho Forum, the Reason Foundation, everyone involved with making this happen and who allowed me to be here. This includes my parents, by the way, because they made me. So if they didn't make me, I would not be standing here. And although I know nobody likes him, I have to thank Andrew Heaton because he gave me a shot. And he let me come on his show and talk about immigration, and it was wonderful, and that's part of the reason I'm here. Now, Jean has been roped into my shenanigans, but if you don't like what I have to say, feel free to call Heaton and tell him all about it, because it's probably his fault. So, to the topic at hand. First, when we talk about the Constitution, we tend to focus on the Bill of Rights and the civil rights that are laid out in those 10 amendments, but it's important to remember that those 10 amendments are attached to another document that is also very, very important, and that's our Constitution. And our Constitution lays out the processes and procedures by which we change the law. So the first thing I'd like to note about Trump's immigration policies in particular, and you may not like it, but it's true, everything he's done is authorized by a statute that was passed by Congress and signed into law by a president. This includes particularly the Immigration and Nationality Act. Now, that one's been around for quite a long time, but it has not been meaningfully updated since 1990. So that's 35 years ago. So one of the biggest problems we face in dealing with immigration policy is that we're shoving 2025 realities into a 1990 law. So all of the things he's doing are set forth in statute. And the statutes themselves grant the executive very broad discretion in immigration enforcement. And that's important to keep in mind because Congress is the one who said, hey, executive branch, you figure this part out, right? And the Congress has also said, under 8 U.S.C. 1252, blah, 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 that federal courts generally lack jurisdiction to review decisions involving discretionary relief, such as adjustment of status or certain relief grants and denials. And the Supreme Court reaffirmed this in Patel v. Garland in 2022. The INA does contain provisions for due process. Under the normal removal procedure, you're going to get a notice to appear in immigration court. You are going to go to a master calendar hearing in which your individual hearing will be scheduled. You have a right to counsel. You have a right to present evidence. You have a right to offer witnesses and plead for relief. You have the right to cross-examine the government's witnesses. All of this happens in front of an immigration judge, and an adverse ruling is appealable to the Board of Immigration Appeals. So in the vast majority of cases, that is the process that is being used. There are two exceptions Glenn mentioned briefly, and I'll touch on those here because they're a bit more unusual. Well, one of them is unusual. First, let's talk quickly about expedited removal. Okay, expedited removal means you can be removed if you entered without inspection. So just a little fun tidbit for immigration law. Entered without inspection, as attorneys, we refer to folks who did that as iwis, which is kind of cute. But being an iwi is bad. It harms your case rather substantially. So you have to have entered without being inspected or paroled. You did not go to a visa, go get a visa at a consulate. You have not been vetted. You have snuck into the country effectively. And if you have been here for less than 2 years, you are not, and you're here unlawfully and you entered without inspection, you are subject to removal without a hearing. That is expedited removal. Now, that's not unique to Trump. Obama deployed and used that provision quite a lot. And it was actually created by, I'm going to have to look at the name of the statute because I always mess it up, but the Illegal Immigration Reform and Immigrant Responsibility Act, or IRRA, of 1996. That was when Bill Clinton was in office, and that is the statute that it's been incorporated into the INA, but that set up expedited removal. Trump didn't invent that. That's in statute. We can move to the AEA. Now, that one is very unusual. Very few have been removed pursuant to the Alien Enemies Act. We mentioned the folks who went to Venezuela. We'll get back to them in just a second. But it's not quite true that this has never been tested. In fact, there was a case, Ludecky, in 1948. The Supreme Court held, first, the government was trying to, this was in 1948, the government was seeking to remove a German national. This was after the war had ended in Europe, and they were seeking to remove him under the AEA, and Ludecky held that any determination as to removals under the INA are precluded from judicial review. The only relief available is habeas corpus, and I know that many of the people, including Mahmoud Khalil and others, have filed habeas cases that will move through the courts over time. There's a statutory authority for removing Mahmoud Khalil. It is in the Immigration and Nationality Act. You're not going to like it, but it's there. An alien whose presence or activities in the United States the Secretary of State has reasonable ground to believe would have potentially serious adverse foreign policy consequences for the United States is deportable. It's just that. That's all it says. We don't have federal precedent on this, but the Board of Immigration Appeals did rule that a written determination by the Secretary of State that an alien's presence could harm U.S. foreign policy is conclusive evidence of deportability under this section. And neither an immigration judge nor the BIA may second guess or evaluate the substance of that determination. So that's the existing precedent we have for that. That's it. And there are reasons for that. Foreign policy is sensitive, and the executive branch is tasked with managing foreign policy. So we can talk a little bit more about Mahmoud Khalil. Yeah, let's do that. So Mahmoud Khalil, the argument for both him and for Ozturk, her full name I'm gonna forget, Rumeysa Ozturk, is that all they did was say they don't like Israel and want the war in Israel to stop. All they did was criticize Israel. I cannot agree with that, and the facts don't agree with that. First of all, Khalil was the leader of a group called Columbia University Apartheid Divest. He led negotiations with the university. Negotiations. This was related to an encampment on the campus. A private university campus was taken over by a group of student activists, many of whom turned out not to be students at all. At one point, Columbia University's rabbi had to warn Jewish students to stay away from campus because it was not safe. Khalil was the face of this movement, gave a lot of press interviews, and represented the organization in negotiations with the university. Now, these negotiations were pursuant to a list of demands. And if I come into your home, you invite me in and I sit down and I say, okay, cool, here's some demands I have for you. You need to change some things around your house, and you need to do this, that, and the other thing, and I'm not going to leave until you do. I'm not exercising my free speech right there. I'm coming into your house and taking it over. Columbia University is a private university, so it went well beyond simply criticizing Israel. They were calling for the divestment of all business with Israel. They demanded that they cease the dual degree partnership with Tel Aviv University, cancel the opening of the Tel Aviv Global Center, and multiple other demands. And that is not just merely expressing an opinion. Occupying a campus is not expressing an opinion. Leading negotiations, which, hey, we're not leaving, the camp stays until you meet our demands, that is not merely an expression of free speech. And there's a legal technicality in that case that does matter, and that is that Khalil is a conditional permanent resident, not a lawful permanent resident. Now, the distinction is slight, but it's there. It is legal. A conditional permanent resident must petition the government to remove those conditions on residents. And so he doesn't have the full, clear green card. He's good for 10 years, honestly can renew forever. He has 2 years to petition to remove those conditions. There's interestingly a precedent actually that relates to this, and I'll just read from the decision, or a description of the decision. Members of the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, or PFLP, were marked for deportation by the Immigration and Naturalization Service. The PFLP is characterized by the government as an international terrorist and communist organization. The resident aliens filed suit, alleging the Attorney General and other federal parties had targeted them for deportation because of their affiliation with a politically unpopular group in violation of their First and Fifth Amendment rights. Sounds kind of familiar, right? That's Reno v. American Arab Anti-Discrimination Committee, 1999. So this is not something that has never happened before. And anyone worried about Mahmoud Khalil getting due process, I'll note that he is represented by Drattel and Lewis, the Center for Constitutional Rights, CLEAR, Vanderhout LLP, Washington Square Legal Services, the New York Civil Liberties Union, the ACLU of New Jersey, and the American Civil Liberties Union. So he is represented. He will get that due process. He is going to get his hearing on habeas. As to Ozturk, it's softer, and we don't have as much information, but again, in the op-ed, she states, the Tufts Community Union Senate passed 3 out of 4 resolutions demanding that the university acknowledge Palestinian genocide, apologize for the university president's statements, disclose its investments, and divest from companies with direct or indirect ties to Israel. These resolutions were the product of meaningful debate and a sincere effort to hold Israel accountable for clear violations of international law. So again, we have demands, she didn't write, we don't like what's happening in Israel, we do not like the war in Israel, we do not support it. It goes so much farther than that. And that's important to keep in mind when we're talking about these cases. We have to be honest about what's actually happening in these cases. I'd like to remind everybody, if I may, that the plural of anecdote is not data. That's another one. Very few were removed to El Salvador, and the sequence of events went something like this. On around March 8th, Venezuela announced they would not accept their own citizens. They flat said, nope, we're not going to take our own citizens back. And in that instance, the INA allows removal to a third country. In this case, they sent them to El Salvador. In the intervening time, Venezuela changed its mind, imagine that, and decided they'd take their citizens back, and now the folks that were in CCOT are back in Venezuela, which is, they were citizens of Venezuela, so they are now back in their home country. There are paths to review, and the one thing, if you believe nothing else, believe me on this one, we can sit here and yell about the president all day, but Congress is the problem. Congress will not update the statute. They've had many opportunities to do so, but it's more profitable to rage at some president and get us yelling at each other. They'll raise more money, they'll get more votes, and then they don't have to do anything, and it's amazing. So they've created the monstrosity of the administrative state that traps citizens just as much as it traps immigrants. And that is the core problem. We cannot hope to elect a benevolent dictator who's only going to enforce the statutes we like. Under our constitutional structure, the executive is vested in the person of the president, the only person elected by the entire nation. And that person's job, really, their literal job description, is to enforce statutes written by Congress. That is our constitutional structure. And if we don't like the way that immigration law is being managed, the solution is to pressure Congress to update the law, bring it into the 21st century, instead of just grifting and making speeches and going on Sunday shows. And we've got to rein in the administrative state. We'll get to Kilmar Abrego Garcia at some point, I'm sure, but you know, as much as we want to think that that was something nefarious, it was almost certainly administrative error. And as Reason has covered, people get caught by that all the time. Civil asset forfeiture. The IRS comes they take your house on their mistake. Best of luck getting it back, even though it was their mistake. So please understand, and please believe me, that Congress is the enemy, my friends. Congress is the core rot in the system, not whoever happens to be sitting there as president at any particular time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Anna. 5 minutes of rebuttal from Glenn. Take it away, Glenn.
Thank you. All right, so first of all, Anne began by describing what the statutes say about the president's ability to deport whoever he wants or under what circumstances. But I think it's very important to note, as you will learn on the first day of law school, that it doesn't matter what statutes say if they violate constitutional rights. Even if the Congress, by a 435-0 vote and then a 100-0 vote, want to authorize the president to deport anybody who is critical of Israel, the Constitution still wouldn't permit that. You can just read the First Amendment that guarantees not only the right of free speech, but also the right to peacefully assemble, to petition your government, all of which apply to foreign students. And you will see that Donald Trump's policy of removing people who criticize Israel, even in an op-ed or who protest against Israel peacefully, as Mahmoud Khalil did, is exactly what the Constitution is intended to prevent. And the fact is that all of these people, or most of them, including Mahmoud Khalil and Ramiza Ozturk, are free because courts have said they don't pose any threat at all. If they're such dangerous people, if they're subverting our foreign policy, why is it that they've never been arrested? If Mahmoud Khalil was blocking Jewish students or harassing Jewish students or occupying buildings, none of which he did, none of which anyone has ever claimed that he did, why was he not among the dozens, in fact, hundreds of people at Columbia who were arrested by the NYPD when the Columbia administrators repeatedly called the NYPD on the students who were protesting? Second issue I want to point out here is that I thought Ann said, no, actually, Ramiza Ozturk did a lot more than write this op-ed. And then she proceeded to basically say the reason she can be deported is because of what she said in her op-ed. It's only the op-ed. Ramiza Ozturk never even attended a protest on Tufts campus against the Israeli destruction of Gaza. Even if she had, that too would be constitutional, but she didn't. The Tufts op-ed that she wrote does not demand anything. It's actually a op-ed that is very banal, very kind of technocratic. It basically says that on March 4th, the Tufts Community Union Senate passed 3 out of 4 resolutions demanding that the university acknowledge Palestinian genocide, apologize, and divest. She wasn't demanding anything. She was summarizing what the student senate said, and the op-ed was simply saying, we think the administration ought to adhere to that resolution. But you know what? You're allowed to demand things of the government under the First Amendment. I just want to ask you to think about something if you have any doubts about the unconstitutionality of these policies. Imagine if Joe Biden had said, all foreign students who are in the United States are permitted to stay here unless there's evidence that they've ever criticized myself or the Democratic Party, in which case they are to be summarily deported. Does anyone have any trouble understanding why that would be blatantly unconstitutional? It's exactly the same thing. It's just that the government's not acting to protect American politicians. They're acting to protect Israel, a foreign country, from criticism that, of course, the First Amendment permits them to express. Then there's this issue of the presidents have great discretion. And oftentimes that's true, but again, it can't run afoul of the Constitution. So Anne said, oh, if you're an immigrant, you're going to be deported, you get all these rights, you get to lawyers, and you get all this. That is how it should be. But the 137 Venezuelans who were picked up and sent in the middle of the night to El Salvador got no notice of any kind, and the Supreme Court was very clear by a 9-0 ruling that that is not permissible. This is what they said about these people who are being deported. Detainees must receive notice after the date of this order that they are subject to removal under the Act. The notice must be afforded within a reasonable time and in such a manner as will allow them to actually seek habeas relief in the proper venue. So they were not given any of the due process rights that the court indicated that they had. Now, there's actually direct precedent about all of these issues. In 2013, Antonin Scalia, long considered a classic right-wing conservative judge, appeared before the National Press Club with Ruth Bader Ginsburg, long considered a classic liberal judge, and they took calls on C-SPAN, and one of the callers said this, quote, to whom does the First Amendment apply? Do undocumented immigrants get these freedoms? And Scalia said, oh, I think so. I think anybody who is president of the United States has protections under the United States Constitution. And Ginsburg said the 14th Amendment doesn't speak of citizens. Some constitutions grant rights to citizens, but our Constitution says persons, and that means every person who is here, documented or undocumented. And I'll just leave you with this one case. I talked about the Australian immigrant who entered, and they wanted to deport him because he joined the Communist Party, which was considered subversive, and the court said, you can't deport people for their political activities that are protected under the First Amendment. There's a case, Spicer versus Randell, in 1958, where the state of California said, we're going to give property tax rebates, even though we don't have to our residents. But if you want to get these, a condition is you have to sign an oath saying that you don't support any subversive organizations. Several veterans of World War II said, we're not signing an oath to get this benefit. We fought in World War II for these freedoms, and the Supreme Court got the case and agreed that you cannot condition the issuance of benefits on people agreeing not to assert a certain political position. There's nothing regular or normal or ordinary about this immigration law. These are all unique to Trump, and they run squarely in conflict with the core constitutional guarantees we're discussing.
Anna, you can take the podium. 5 minutes of rebuttal from you. Take it away, Anna.
I don't know who Anne is or what she's been arguing. I'm Anna. That's okay, but well, it was Anna and then it was Anne, and I have a sister named Anne, so please don't confuse us. So just a few things about that. Again, I feel like we're talking past each other a little bit here. I keep saying this is all grounded in statute. This is all grounded in statute. This is, and the Supreme Court has reviewed these things, and that is our process under our Constitution. And it's true, Congress can't just pass a law saying you can't speak or say certain things or hate my opponents, but that's not what's happening here. You know, there's an obsession right now with the policy over Israel, and I know that Glenn is very passionate about this issue. And again, there's something about, you know, we both stood here and read the same language from the op-ed, but I emphasized the demands, and there were, as you know, in 2024, widespread, some of them got really violent, student protests based on this issue. I can't speak to exactly what happened at Tufts, but she wasn't making demands of the US government in her op-ed. She was making demands of a private university. And that is, I think, an important distinction. She wasn't petitioning the government. She was petitioning a private university. And let's see. Oh, here's something else. people keep talking about this as if it really, really matters. Khalil has never been arrested, never been arrested. Let me assure you that no criminal charge is required for you to be removed from the United States. No conviction, nothing. Khalil, for example, is removable whether or not he was a member of a gang because he entered unlawfully. That's one of the few things under immigration law that is actually a criminal offense. Almost all immigration matters are civil. And, even on the first day of law school, I did also learn that you cannot, Congress can't pass something that's unconstitutional. But the Immigration and Nationality Act has been around since the 50s. And it's even earlier than that. There was some format of it in the 20s. And so if this statute is truly so problematic, then it's amazing it stood the test of time and still exists. We still use it. And again, I reject that this is unique to Trump. Again, Obama used expedited removals rather freely. So that is not new. We have precedent going way back to 1948 about somebody being removed under the Alien Enemies Act. So again, it's not that this is all novel to Trump, and he's not just going around saying, hey, if you don't like Israel, I'm kicking you out. I think that's an oversimplification of the issue. And again, all of this is authorized in statute. Legal challenges are proceeding, and that is appropriate. But if you don't like U.S. immigration law, because that's what this is, law, then you need to petition the people who can make laws. The president cannot make laws. Arguably, he has a duty and obligation to enforce the written law as it exists at that time. And right now, he is enforcing the Immigration and Nationality Act. I said at the beginning that the plural of anecdote is not data, and I will say that again. We have a handful of cases. We've got Khalil, we've got Ozturk, we've got the 200 or so Venezuelans who spent some time at CCOT, but that's not representative of a system that literally has tens of millions of people in it. That's including people who are here lawfully, people who are here without status, whether they entered without inspection, whether they're overstayed a visa. You do not have to commit a crime to be removable. That's not the standard. And again, the provision of the INA that was used to arrest and detain Mahmoud Khalil has at least been reviewed by the Board of Immigration Appeals, if not federal courts. So it's not, I don't think it's a proper characterization to say that this is just all novel, Trump is making it up as he goes along, when everything is grounded in a statute. Everything is grounded in a statute. Even the INA allows removal to third countries. If the home country can't or won't accept the person, or if the home country would put them in danger, removal to a third country is authorized by a statute. So again, he's the president enforcing the law. We may not like that he's enforcing that law, but we cannot count on electing somebody who's not going to enforce laws we don't like. We have to stop focusing so much on the executive because only Congress can change immigration laws. And again, immigration law underscores all of this. So I'll leave it there for now, and we'll move on to the next section.
Thank you. First of all, apologies to Anna. I think I got that right. And okay. And Glenn was listening too. Okay. And also, we are now going to the Q&A portion of the evening. I want to say that, especially since I felt that we haven't given enough attention to audience questions, I want to limit to each of the debaters the potential to ask one question of your opponent. Now, you can exercise that option now, or you can wait for questions and then exercise the option. Glenn, would you like to wait? Would you like to ask a question of Anna now, or wait for the questions?
I'd like to ask one now.
Go ahead.
Anna, and again, also apologize for
That's
having
okay,
your
Gary.
name wrong. I nonetheless want to apologize. You said that this isn't something that Trump is inventing, that this is something that Obama did, this is something that prior presidents did. Nobody claims that Trump is invoking a statute that nobody invoked before. You're, of course, right that these statutes have been used by presidents in deportation policy. What's new, though, is the interpretation that if somebody expresses a political opinion critical of U.S. foreign policy, it can be interpreted as undermining American foreign policy or endangering it, and therefore justifies deportation on that basis. Are you aware of any cases where Obama, in 8 years in office, or Biden in 4 years of office, or even Trump in his first 4 year in office, ordered somebody deported because of their political expression or their political activity?
I think you and I have a fundamental disagreement about what this is. I am not aware of anybody removed just for free speech. And, you know, this is one of those things, there's going to be a lot of cases, and I cannot speak to every one of them. But again, we're talking about Ozturk and Khalil mostly in this context, and we're talking about criticisms of Israel. And I think, you know, that has become such a focal point that we're kind of missing the bigger picture, perhaps. And there's no policy that I am aware of where Trump has said, it is now the policy of the United States that if anybody criticizes Israel or our actions there, they will be deported. I have not read that, seen that, heard that anywhere. However, we have, like, again, this is just reality, whether it should be or not. Israel is a formal ally of the United States. So I feel like the obsession with criticisms of Israel is what this really boils down to, not a broader effort by Trump to get rid of people who have opinions he doesn't like. I think that we have the two examples, and you know, with millions of removals over the years, there's no way I could speak to any particular president doing this, although, so yeah, we'll stop there.
I'll allow you to comment if you want to, or leave it at that, yeah?
I just want to quickly say, I mean, Mahmoud Khalil got a lot of attention because he was the first, and Ozturk got a lot of attention because it was the most extreme, but there are dozens and dozens of students who have been deported solely because they ended up on the list of pro-Israel groups like Canary Mission or Batar for having supposedly been anti-Semitic solely due to the political views that they've been expressing. So I don't know, I feel like the Ozturk case kind of on its own makes the point.
If I
Do you
may,
want to
just
call it,
very
please?
quickly.
Yes, go ahead.
Yes, my understanding is that students are not being deported. There have been a lot of student visa revocations. That's a Department of State process to revoke the student visa, and that most of those students were able to stay. Again, this is such a huge topic, I can't, you know, be able to speak to every single detail, but I am not aware of mass deportations of students, but I am aware that they did cancel or revoke a number of student visas, theoretically, based on that and other, perhaps, speech issues.
Okay, Anna, now it's potentially your turn. You can ask Glenn a question. You can also wait if you want. Do you want to exercise that right now, or wait for audience questions to see if you want to ask him a question?
I'll wait. I want to see what the audience
First question from the audience. Please frame it as a question. Don't identify yourself. Cut to the chase.
Thank you both. Here's an example of a case that just happened in March. Dr. Rasha Alawiya, she's a med school professor at Brown University, and she specializes in kidney transplants. And she was deported because they found pictures that were sympathetic towards Hezbollah on her phone. Is that not a case of purely based on political opinion that she's being deported? Does her First Amendment rights not apply in this case?
So that's a very good question, and there's a distinction in her case. She departed the country and was not allowed back in. She was not removed. And so that was a review done by Customs and Border Protection. There are at least 5 agencies involved here, so it gets pretty wacky. So I don't know that pictures on her phone were the reason. If I recall, there was one person who was denied entry based on attending a Hamas leader's funeral. I can't recall if that was this particular physician, but I will say this, and this is, you know, I hope you'll believe me, but the media is really hot to run with these stories, and they never post the corrections. And a lot of times there'll be some sort of story come out that looks really horrifying, and then a week later you realize, oh, that's what happened. But we never get that news. There was, rumors of a guy who had an H-1B, and he tried to come in from Mexico, and they put him in second inspection, and it was awful. But it turned out the guy had his approval notice, but he hadn't been maintaining his status by working for his employer, and they called his employer. Like, CBP actually bothered to call his employer and say, does this guy work for you? And they said, we've never heard of him. No, he doesn't work here. And so that's why he was denied admission, not because, I don't know, whatever reason, nefarious thoughts that people had. Oh, he had his documents and they didn't let him in. That's the reason he was denied entry. And there are so many stories that pop up in the news. I'd urge you all to please just pause a minute. This is such an emotional topic, and see if we don't get more information in the long run.
Comment from you, Glenn? Do you wanna? No?
No, I'm good.
Okay. Next. Okay. Also, by the way, those in the cheap seats in the balcony, we do, I think, have a mic over there, and we don't want to discriminate against you. So if you want to ask a question, I believe that mic over there is where you can line up, and certainly I'll give balcony people a chance to ask a question. Next question, sir, from here.
Columbia students have told me that, like immigrant students have told me that when they fill out their forms, their visa forms, that there's some sort of clause or sentence that says that they give up their right to engage in political activity. I have heard this. Is that true? Is that related to this? Is that a justification that's been given?
I am not aware of that happening anywhere. In my practice, I have never, ever seen that. The only form that you fill out to get a temporary, non-immigrant visa is called the DS-160, and there's definitely nothing in there that says you give up your right to protest. And I have not seen any statement like that. I don't know where that information came from other than, you've heard this from your friends, but I'm not aware of any Department of State procedure or form that even asks that question. Now, they will look at your social media, and they've been able to do that for some time, but I would reject anything that said that you can't protest if you come here. I think absolutely immigrants have the right to protest, but, our free speech laws, it's clear, but there are time, place, manner restrictions. It's not just a free-for-all all the time. So I think that, there's a difference, again, between protesting and occupation of a campus. But I haven't heard of anybody being asked to sign away their right to protest.
Any comment from you?
Just quickly, I think it's reasonable to infer that if there was such a clause, that Marco Rubio or someone in the Trump administration would have cited it as justification in these cases that have become controversial for the deportations. I want to also add, though, this is not a policy where people in the United States who are here to study are being deported if they express raucous or polemical opinions or engage in protest. People can and do protest in defense of Israel, and they're not being deported. They can protest all sorts of things. The one and only type of expression or viewpoint that is the basis for these deportations is criticizing Israel in general and what they're doing in Gaza in particular.
I do see a questioner on the balcony. Sir, what is your question?
Yeah, so it's
Right into the mic? Yeah, go ahead.
Is it working?
Go ahead.
All right, great. So it's kind of for Glenn. I'm curious about the idea that, the resolution is discussing generally violate. And I think Anna kind of made a few points about this. I'd like to understand, besides the few fringe examples, which, they are obviously in the news, right? But dozens of students, besides students protesting Israel, what else in your view is Trump doing that would be considered generally violating civil liberties in terms of implementation things?
Let me reverse it and let Glenn take that question first. Can you address that question, Glenn?
Yeah, I think he asked it of me, actually. But
Okay.
Well, first of all, we're talking here about Trump's deportation policies. There are deportation policies that exist for every president, meaning if someone is here in the country without legal authorization, they can be deported and are deported. I don't consider those Trump's
deportation policies. I consider Trump's deportation policies to be the ones he uniquely implemented. And it's not just a few students. I believe it's over 100 now. We don't know all the cases. And Marco Rubio says that he intends to do hundreds, if not thousands more, as they're brought to his attention. Specifically ones that come from the Canary Mission or Batar, who have been involved in the campus protest, or in the case of Ozturk, writing op-eds against Israel. But the other aspect of it is this invocation of the Alien Enemies Act, which, as I mentioned, is a statute that can only be invoked during wartime. It was invoked in the War of 1812, World War I, and World War II, that gives the right of summary deportation. But even there, as I read from the Supreme Court, due process is required. Nazis who were accused of being loyal to Nazi Germany during World War II were given process before they were deported. It was the basis for interning Japanese Americans. So the refusal to give meaningful due process to people before they're put on a plane in the middle of the night and whisked off to some other country is also a unique Trump deportation policy that clearly violates the due process law, and 9 justices on the Supreme Court, when it was finally brought to them, have said as much.
Any comment from you, Anna?
I know, I'm struggling because I know too many things right now because I practice immigration law, so probably not. I'd probably get in the weeds.
Okay, you pass. Yeah, all right. Next question.
If an immigrant enters into
A little bit more
negotiations,
into the mic, yeah. Go ahead.
Just a little closer.
Yep. If an immigrant enters into negotiations or makes demands of a private business, is it always constitutional to remove that immigrant, not just from the business, but from the country? And if not, what is it about these negotiations or demands that justifies that?
Anna, could you?
Sure. So, I mean, it's a little tricky, and I'm not a criminal law attorney. But I do think that if you go to a private business and you threaten them with something and say, if you don't meet our list of demands, we're going to continue whatever disruptive action we're doing, I think that, you know, there are criminal statutes that could come into play. Trespass, for example, harassment. You know, not all speech is protected, and sometimes action is, you know, speech and action aren't always, you know, I'm not saying that very well. But there is a separation, like sometimes speech becomes action is what I'm saying. And so I think that anybody who's here who engaged in something like making demands of a private entity, a private company, would be subject to removal. But that might be based on a criminal statute. But it's definitely not okay, generally, to come into the country and go to a private organization with a list of demands and a threat that you're not going to stop doing whatever disruptive activity it is unless they meet all of your demands.
I'd like to just, because on the Ozturk case, I'm still kind of amazed by the claim that she was making demands simply because the first sentence of this op-ed, which she co-authored with 3 other people, said the tough Community Union Senate passed 3 out of 4 resolutions demanding. She was describing what they did. But even if she did demand something in an op-ed, there's no indication at all that she and so many of these other students threatened anything. She didn't say, I'm demanding that you divest from Israel, and if you don't, we're going to blow up the president's office, or we're going to throw rocks at students who support Israel. She just wrote an op-ed advocating that the school take a certain position of the kind the schools took, for example, in the 1980s when students were protesting and occupying far worse than they did in 2024 about Israel to demand divestment from South Africa. And as far as Mahmoud Khalil was concerned, the reason he was the negotiator is because both sides trusted him. The students there trusted him because he was older. He had a very kind of appealing demeanor. Jewish students told the Wall Street Journal he would actually say if he heard an anti-Semitic comment, this isn't appropriate. That's not the values of our protest movement. And the administration respected him as well. And he was just the bridge, the conciliator, trying to get a deal between the students on the one hand and the administration on the other. But it is not unconstitutional to tell a university we're going to keep protesting unless you, for example, the government ends the Vietnam War or you stop doing allowing weapons manufacturers onto campus. These are things that are iconic on American campus life. Nobody ever suggested that people can be deported for engaging in protest or writing an op-ed until the Trump administration got into office and began doing Israel's bidding.
Next question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Glenn, I just wanted to have you respond and kind of build on that last question in terms of whether there's a meaningful distinction constitutionally between petitioning or demanding, in this case, a private university or the government. Because earlier I understand Anna to have essentially made the point that petitioning a private university has some legal distinction in terms of assessing the constitutionality. So just curious for your take on that.
I'm just not aware of anybody previously suggesting that, for example, if you go outside the headquarters of Boeing or Palantir or any other controversial corporation and you demand or you protest or you go to Amazon and you demand that they allow their employees to unionize, that somehow is outside of the parameters of the First Amendment. I mean, this is free speech and free assembly in the United States that can be directed at anybody. And I've never in my life heard that free speech is only for objecting to government policies or protesting government policies. Of course you can protest and denounce all you want the behavior of private corporations.
Comment? Yeah.
Yeah, I need to make the distinction. The comparison, the analogy here would be going to Amazon and saying, all right, I got an army of people. We're going to put tents up and campers up in your parking lot. We're going to harass your workers as they're coming to work. It's going to seriously disrupt your business unless you do these things we want. Again, you guys, you're New Yorkers. You guys saw the encampments. That was not just a protest. That disrupted campus life for everybody. Imagine you paid $90,000 a year to go to Columbia University, and you can't even go to a graduation because of this. Lots of people were impacted. So it's not about the constitutionality of protesting a government versus a private entity. It's about what form that protest takes, and if it's harmful to that organization, its members, its students, its employees, then that's a distinction that I think is worth acknowledging. And so I think we keep going back and forth about whether this was simply expressing bad ideas or ideas Trump doesn't like, or actually engaging in activities. Like, nobody would say, I could go get a group of people to go take over a local Amazon facility and shut down their operations and keep their employees from coming to work because free speech.
Next question.
Glenn, if Anna is correct that there are a variety of statutes that do permit at least the vast majority of deportations that Trump has enacted under his administration, why should people who are not strict constitutionalists, many libertarians included, care very much whether these deportations are strictly constitutional if it supports, if the other side is disregarding the Constitution anyway, and it supports a policy that they support, like reducing immigration?
Go ahead.
I've worked with a lot of libertarians before, including Reason Magazine and the Cato Institute, and I've known a lot of libertarians. I've had Ron Paul on my show many times, lots of other libertarians. I've never heard libertarians minimize or diminish the Bill of Rights as some annoying, strict constitutionalism. I mean, it's sort of foundational to our country that those limitations on the government be enforced. And again, one of the things I think you're right about is that the Trump campaign, all three times, including in 2024, was based on the promise of doing mass deportations. But none of these policies that we're discussing have anything to do with that objective. Again, it's not that Trump is banning foreign students entirely. He's not deporting all foreign students. He's not even deporting all foreign students who engage in political expression or political protest. He's deporting only students, revoking their visa, who engage in a particular kind of political expression on a particular issue about one country in particular and nothing else. And to look at the First Amendment and say, oh, you have to be a really strict constitutionalist to find that disturbing, I think is odd. I don't think we should minimize the Constitution in that manner, like, oh, it's just kind of strict by the rules stuff. Yeah, it should be strict by the rules stuff. And individuals don't have the capacity to violate the Constitution because it's a limit on what the government can do. Only the government can violate the Constitution, and I think that's what it's doing.
Any comment, Anna?
Sorry, things are happening. Things come at you so fast. I also don't think, libertarians should value the rule of law, too. And I think that, again, we may not like a statute, We may hate it. And yeah, it's a real pain to go and pay attention to your local House races and your state House races and all of those. But that's where you're going to get a solution to any of this. And that includes libertarians. Now, I understand a lot of libertarians are, you know, an open borders kind of world and prefer that. And that's fine to prefer that. But you're going to have to convince Congress. And, you know, we have our constitutional structure with our 3 branches. We've got the executive. His job, her job, is to enforce written law. That's it. And then you've got the legislature that is responsible for writing those laws, and that is where the failure has occurred. Again, we keep talking about Trump's policies, but everything he's doing is grounded in a statute that was passed by Congress and signed by a president. So it's not even about, if we don't, there's still a path to fix this. If we don't like it, if we don't like these, these policies that come from law, and again, we all know that Congress has given delegated most of their authority to the administrative state, so we're governed by rules and guidelines and all kinds of crazy stuff. So I think it's holding Congress accountable, and I think that that's in the libertarians' interest too. Smaller government, hold them to what their actual job is, which is not actually to hold show trials and raise funds, but to make law. And again, we're looking at a 1990 update to the law. 35 years ago, phones were literally attached to walls. So, I mean, a lot has changed in those years, and I think it's very easy to get mad at the president. It's sexy. He's the one who's getting all the news coverage. You love him, you hate him, all of that stuff. But at the end of the day, almost all of it is irrelevant. Because unless we can fix the underlying statutes, Trump is restricted from going beyond any statute. He may be reading a statute creatively, and the Supreme Court may shut that down. But again, everything that he's done so far is grounded in statute. I'm not aware of hundreds of removals of students. Again, I am aware of revocation of visas, but that has been, to my knowledge, restored. I hope that helps.
Next question.
To Glenn or Anna, is it constitutional that all these ICE officers are masked? 1, is this constitutional that they might be receiving $30,000 bonuses for how many people they arrest? And 3, is it constitutional that, and then this is for my personal benefit, that they can check my iPhone for my social media when crossing the border?
I guess that's a challenge for you, Anna. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so there were 3 prongs there. The first one was... Oh, the mask. Okay, so I don't think there's anything in the Constitution about that either way. What I will tell you is that it's not really unique to immigration. Once again, it's not unique to immigration. We've seen videos of raids by the FBI, the DEA, and ATF. They mask too. And I think that I'm going to say the uncomfortable part out loud, but there is a part of society, it's very fringe, but that has embraced violence as a political tactic. And because of that, and because of the intensity of the protests against ICE, I expect they mask for safety. But that's something we can discuss another time. There's nothing in the Constitution saying they can be masked or can't be masked. So the second one was... Oh, so it is actually forbidden by Department of Homeland Security to have any kind of a quota. So if Trump is using a quota, if his administration is using a quota, we should expose that and shut it down. That is not lawful. That is not appropriate. So if they are using quotas, that's wrong. And a bonus for quotas, meeting quotas, would be wrong, in my opinion. I can't get into the constitutional arguments immediately off the top of my head, but no, I do not agree with that. And then your third one was about looking at your social media. When you're outside the United States, you're not under the jurisdiction of the Constitution and the Constitution's protection. So what I think you're asking me is if you come in and you go to CBP, like Customs and Border Protection, say they put you in second inspection and they want to see your phone, you may have to give it to them. If you're worried, call a lawyer. We can talk you through it. And I think, there's a lot of fear. I've heard a lot of fear from my clients about crossing the border. I haven't had anyone have trouble with that yet. That doesn't mean it doesn't happen occasionally. But, again, when you're with customs, they don't need a warrant to search your phone the way that they would if you were on U.S. territory.
Comment of Glenn?
Yeah, I do agree with Anna that, unfortunately, it is true that at the border, the government has immense power to do things to you, even if you're a citizen, that it would be otherwise constitutionally prohibited from doing, and looking at your phone and analyzing things on your phone, or interrogating you about where you've been or what you've done, even though you can have a lawyer and decline to answer. It's likely you could be put in detention. They've had a lot of court cases that give the government a lot of power constitutionally. But I just want to underscore the point that, I think Anna's main point here is that, oh, look, it's the fault of Congress. Congress has to pass laws. They have to pass better laws. There are laws that give the president a lot of discretion. Above all of that is the Bill of Rights. And the whole point of that is that even if 98% of Americans want to ban the exercise of a certain religion, they can't because the Bill of Rights says so. Even if 98% of Americans want foreign students deported if they engage in political protests, they still can't do so because the First Amendment rests above that. So it's not a matter of the statutes, but if Trump is interpreting the statutes in a way that the Constitution bans it, or if Congress enacts laws to get tougher on immigration that allows Trump, for example, to deport foreign students who engage in protest or criticism of Israel, it still wouldn't be permitted if the Constitution bars it. And I think that's the issue here. It's not a statutory problem, it's a constitutional problem, and not just in terms of what the statutes say, but in terms of the way Trump and Marco Rubio and others in the Trump administration are applying and interpreting it, not as a general rule of what foreign students should be deported, but based on their viewpoints and the cause in defense of which they're protesting.
May I ask a question?
Okay. No. Do you want to ask Glenn a question?
Yeah.
Okay.
You're talking about this as being kind of widespread. Do you have any examples that don't involve Israel?
No, that's the whole point. There's for example this very neurotic and I would say unstable professor at Columbia named Shai David, who has been protesting almost every single day since October 7th. He follows around Columbia professors. He gets in the face of protesters who are protesting against Israel. He carries on like an absolute and complete lunatic on campus. He's been suspended, and he's here as a non-citizen. He's not an American citizen. He's a citizen of Israel, and there's nobody in the Trump administration even remotely thinking about deporting him, even though he's raising more of a ruckus on his own than any of these students who are being deported, because it's viewpoint-based. If there were examples that I had of students being deported if they protest in favor of Israel, or if they protest against the war in Ukraine, or in favor, I would have a lot less of an argument. The problem that I have is precisely that. All of these student deportations are based on activism around Israel, and that's what makes it so disturbing.
All two of them?
No, there's way more than two of them. I mean, there was just a case.
We don't know, though, do we?
No,
we don't have clear stats. But, USCIS filings, these are not public records. We don't have a lot of information. And again, you keep saying that I'm insisting on the statute at the expense of the Constitution, but that's not true. I am arguing the Constitution. I'm saying this is the constitutional structure. The amendments are very sexy, but without that Constitution, they are null and void. So,
just really quickly on that. Marco Rubio has talked about this openly, what the policy is, and he's repeatedly said that if it's brought to his attention that people on campus were protesting against Israel, he regards that as a threat to U.S. foreign policy, and he has revoked the visa of every single person who has come before him. It's being sent by these pro-Israel groups, the Canary Mission and Batar, and that he hopes to deport hundreds, if not thousands more. There was just another case
this week of Badr Suri, the Georgetown PhD, who has expressed criticism of Israel. It seems like his main offense is that his wife has family members who are in Hamas, but he has done nothing to justify it, and as a result, the court ordered him released as well. We're focusing on these two cases because it is important to kind of get illustrative cases. As I said, Mahmoud Khalil was the first case. Ozturk is the most extreme, but there's dozens, hundreds, according to Marco Rubio, and he hopes there to be thousands of similar cases where people are deported for no reason other than that they protested what Rubio considers to be a keystone of the foreign policy of the United States, which is supporting and arming and funding Israel. And that's what the heart of all this is about.
Right, but the proposition is that Trump's deportation efforts generally violate constitutional concerns. And it seems like it's not a general issue. It's more specific to this one thing, and that is criticism of Israel.
Well, the unique parts of the Trump deportation policy, I mean, again, deporting people who are in the country without legal authority is not a Trump deportation policy. That is a United States government policy, regardless of who's president. I understand Trump's deportation policies that we're debating to be the parts of Trump's deportation policy that he uniquely instituted, and it's why there's such a controversy being caused, not just by these students, but also rounding up people with no due process, shipping them to the South Sudan or to El Salvador, because they're unique to Trump. That's the reason there's a debate about them. There's a lot of indignation about them because it's never been done before.
Okay, next question. Yeah.
Hi there. So I understand that the effort to deport Mahmoud al-Khalil ultimately failed. And subsequent to that, he went back to advocacy within the movement that he was previously part of, including an interview a couple of weeks ago where he still on the same side he was before. What are the odds of that case being reopened?
Yeah, do you want to take that question?
I just want to be just very quickly. Mahmoud Khalil has been released on basically like a bond from immigration detention on the grounds that he doesn't pose a threat to the public or the public order, but the Trump administration is still in the process of trying to deport him. That will be judged and decided by a federal court. He has a case where he's suing the Trump administration for violation of his constitutional rights. So the only thing that's happening here is that these students, including the one I just named from Georgetown, as well as Ozturk from Tufts and Mahmoud Khalil and others, are being released by courts, but not having the deportation proceeding dismissed, just saying you don't have to keep them in prison while the deportation proceeding is ongoing because they don't pose any threat to the public if they're not in an ICE detention facility.
Comment?
Just very quickly, again, as I said at the beginning, these immigration proceedings involve due process. You can call witnesses, you can present evidence, you get an attorney. All of that is true in these immigration proceedings. But yes, Glenn is correct. Even though he's been released, he is still likely to face a removal court.
Gentleman in the balcony, did you ask a question already, or are you a different guy?
Can I ask a question?
I'm sorry?
Now? Yeah, we can ask a question. I haven't asked one yet.
You already asked a question.
I have not, no.
It's only one per customer, so.
No, he did. He hasn't asked one. He hasn't asked one.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you
It's
right.
hard to see up there.
Not a problem.
You're a new guy. Ask a question. Go ahead.
Okay.
Ask question, new guy? Different balcony guy.
Different balcony guy. To Glenn and Anna, if you've got something as well. So this immigration debate, unexpectedly for me, runs parallel to a trend we've seen of stretching conspiracy laws to criminalize otherwise protected conduct and speech, particularly here in New York. Recent examples include Doug Mackey's vague conspiracy conviction being overturned by the Second Circuit, the failed overcharging of conspiracy crimes in Diddy's case, and the one-case prosecution covered extensively by Reason. These raise serious concerns about eroding free speech and freedom of association in order to prosecute the unpopular under vague conspiracy charges. And so, Glenn, looking ahead, where do you think this trend leads in the immigration context? Is there a specific endgame you see that we might only realize we've normalized once it is too late?
Yeah, I think it's such a great question and such an important one. I've been debating and speaking out on these deportation issues from the time they began back in February. And it's so interesting that every time one of these cases is brought up, that I bring it up or someone else brings it up, Mahmoud Khalil or Ramiza Ozturk, you will hear people saying, well, it's not free speech to harass Jewish students. It's not free speech to block Jewish students' ingress and egress. It's not free speech to take over buildings. It's not free speech to destroy property. It's not free speech to justify October 7th. And each time I hear that, I say, when did Ramiza Ozturk do any of that? She wasn't even at a protest. Like, you're linking her to other people whose beliefs she shares. It would be like saying every Trump supporter is guilty of using violence against police officers because a few of them who share those views went to the Capitol and did that on January 6th. Same with Mahmoud Khalil. You know, there was even references that Anna made to the fact that these buildings were taken over. He wasn't at the building at Hamilton Hall that was taken over. And as I said, he was, you know, there's a Wall Street Journal article in 2025 that profiled him. I could read a few paragraphs, but I'll just summarize it, where basically everybody on campus said that he is universally respected. He's really liked in the Georgetown community, and the role that he was playing was as a go-between trying to forge a deal. It would be like saying, oh, if the United States is negotiating with Hamas and Israel, it must mean that the United States now somehow is on the side of Hamas because they're bringing back to Israel the demands of Hamas. That was the role he was playing. And so I think it's extremely important when we're talking about any of these individuals that if you want to make accusations about things that they did, that you make sure that what you're accusing them of things are that they actually did. And in the case of Mahmoud Khalil, none of the things that are typically brought against as accusations against Columbia students are things he did. And Ramiza Ozturk, I mean, isn't even in the same universe as that. As I said, she never even attended a protest, let alone, and same with the Georgetown doctor as well, of Indian descent, who's married to a Palestinian woman. He didn't do anything of these sorts of things, and that is where the constitutional problems lie.
Comment from you, Anna?
Just very quickly, at no point did I say that Mahmoud Khalil stormed and took over the building. I did not say that. I referred to the encampment on campus, that he was negotiating on behalf of that encampment, taking over the university campus itself. And I've seen videos of the harassment of Jewish students. It's quite chilling. But I'm not saying he was there and did these things. I did not say at any time that he took over that building.
But is he responsible for those?
Why would he be responsible for taking over the building?
Or harassing Jewish? No, that I agree with you totally.
But he is the one who's going to the university with the list of demands saying, we are not leaving until you meet all these demands.
They are not leaving until these demands are met.
So you're trying, here's the thing. If you're my client, and you're a conditional permanent resident, and you say, hey, Anna, I got this great idea. I'm at Columbia, and there's an encampment, and it's crazy, and like Jewish students are being harassed.
Tons of Jewish students in the encampment.
I didn't interrupt you. Now I've lost my train of thought. You know, if that client came to me and said, you know, everybody likes me, they all respect me, so I feel like I should be the go-between, I would say, don't you even dare. I'm going to make you sign something in writing. Don't do it. Why would you insert yourself in that place? Again, I have not been able to find a lot of detailed information about his actual activities. We have anecdotal evidence from people who say, oh, he was just really well respected and everybody liked him and that's why he was the negotiator. But again, why is a university in the process of negotiating their own campus being free from an encampment? You know, that's not a protest, that's an occupation.
I'm afraid that we've run out of time for the Q&A. If you have a ticket to the party, you'll be able to buttonhole our two debaters. We need to go to the summary portion of the evening. According to Oxford-style rules, the affirmative gets the first 5 minutes to do a summary. You can do it from the table chair.
Last, because I went first the first time, or I go first again?
I'm sorry, yeah, the negative, I swear, according to Oxford-style rules, the negative goes last. Because the affirmative goes first, so that's supposed to be an advantage. So therefore, you go first.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I just want to emphasize that what we're debating, and that's the way I began as well, is what these specific deportation policies are that Donald Trump is implementing. And it's not just what the statute says. The statute is extremely vague. There's no statute that says that you have to deport any students, even if they're here legally, who engage in political protests. There's no statute that says that. nor is that the Trump policy. The Trump administration is not deporting students who engage in political expression or who write politically controversial op-eds or who even engage in protest. You're totally free to do that, as long as you don't support one cause and one cause only, and that cause is protesting against the Israeli genocide in Gaza. And yes, it may be true that you would be most safely advised if you go to a lawyer and they would say, you know what, just sit in the corner, be super quiet, never say anything to upset people. That's the best way to deal with everything. But that is not what the spirit of our country is, nor is it what the Constitution protects. The whole point of our Constitution, which again applies equally to people in this country, whether you're a citizen or not, is that you're allowed to have spirited, not just debates where you write op-eds like Ramiza Ozturk did and got deported for it or is in the process of being deported for it, but also engage in protest. Nonviolent protest, and nothing Mahmoud Khalil did, nothing that dozens of these other students did, remotely involved violence. Yes, it's true they're getting due process. I didn't say their due process rights are being violated. I said their free speech rights are being violated. And the reason their free speech rights are being violated is because you cannot condition any kind of benefit or right, such as you have the right to study here in the United States, based on a order that you not engage in certain political expression or political activity. If they were guilty of crimes, if they had been arrested, if they even did any kind of activities that could possibly be in the same universe as criminality, that would be one thing, but that's not the case, which is what we're debating. Now, the other issue that I just want to make sure we all recall, the due process issue here is what the Trump administration is doing when they're rounding people up without any prior notice that they're being deported, let alone any reason why they're being deported or the country to which they're being deported. That was why that was so controversial, was because hundreds, maybe even by now thousands of people were rounded up or picked up by ICE. Sometimes they were picked out of ICE deportation. Other times they were at port of entries where they were seeking asylum, and they weren't given notice that they were going to be deported. They weren't given notice they were being deported under the Alien Enemies Act. They certainly weren't being given notice that they're being deported to a third country. They simply got deported. And then after their lawyers were left to try and go to the court, which is why Judge Boasberg, for example, ordered that plane to be turned around and the government ignored that, that was their only opportunity, was after the fact. And so many of them got deported unjustly based on false accusations. And the issue there, not with the student's case, but the issue, that's a free speech problem. The issue here is a due process problem, that they are not given any process of any kind, let alone the process that is due under the Constitution. I think that we have to understand the reality here to really understand the constitutional issues at play. There is no secret that the Trump administration's biggest donors, the Trump campaign's biggest donors, except for Elon Musk, but the next 7 or 8 are all people whose primary cause, or one of whose primary causes, is making sure the United States stays loyal to Israel. Trump made promises during the campaign to them when he spoke at their events that he would make Israel great again and make America great again. He promised that he would remove these students who are protesting against Israel. His administration is filled with fanatical, lifelong supporters of Israel. And this is the reason why they've chosen and singled out this particular viewpoint for deportation. Even though I'm glad it's not the case, if it were the case that they were deporting foreign students en masse or deporting foreign students who ever uttered a political expression while on U.S. soil on the grounds that they shouldn't be, that they're not here for that reason, then maybe it would actually be a constitutionally stronger argument to make. The fact that they're singling out one particular viewpoint, that the Trump administration from the top to the bottom in every single department has made very clear is a viewpoint they vehemently oppose and are punishing people who express that viewpoint or who protest in its name, that those are the people whose visas are being revoked. To me, that makes it so clear on its face what is actually going on here, which is punishment for political expression. I can show you so many people who have protested in defense of Israel, or for other causes, protested against Trump's policy of not financing the war in Ukraine, or protested his domestic policies. There are no examples of people having their visas revoked for that. There's only one cause, one viewpoint that gets you in the danger zone where your visas can be revoked, and that is the cause and the viewpoint that these students have expressed. And then just remember, the due process issue is separate. We haven't spent much time on it because to me it's such a clear case, to the point where even when it got to the Supreme Court, they said Even if you're a Nazi, an accused Nazi under the Alien Enemies Act of World War II, you got due process. You can't just round people up and send them off to prison without at least giving them an opportunity to go into court with lawyers and say, this is not a tattoo of Tren de Aragua. This is an autism awareness tattoo that I got tattooed on my body because my brother is autistic. These are two separate violations of the Constitution, equally important, and they're being done not in an isolated way, but in a systematic way. Thanks very much.
Anna, 5 minutes. 5 minutes of summary from Anna Gorisch. Take it away, Anna.
All right, I'm pulling an Amy Coney Barrett here. I got no notes. So I think what I'd like to emphasize at this point is I'd like to go back to the beginning and remind everybody what the actual proposition is. And the proposition is not Trump's policies with regard to supporting Israel are unconstitutional, or Trump's focus on supporting Israel is unconstitutional. It is that his immigration policies writ large, generally, on the whole, violate key civil liberties in the American Constitution. And I think that it seems very much like what we are arguing about is Israel and the support for Israel. And, you know, I had a hard time preparing for this debate a bit just because there are so many examples and you can't be ready to address every single one of them, although I will note that those who had their student visas revoked, most of those were based on petty crimes, not protesting for Israel, because they did a sweep. I think ICE did a sweep of the SEVIS record, and they found that certain people had been charged with crimes, and that's why their visas were revoked. It happened to a client of mine when Biden was in office. She was arrested for a DUI. She was not convicted, and her student visa was revoked. This is not unique to Trump. Again, there seems to be some argument that the law is irrelevant to the analysis, but it can't possibly be, because his policies are grounded in statute. Again, and I mean, that really does matter. And again, the plural of anecdote is not data, and I think that if we're looking at this, you know, it cannot be just he deported or targeted a few people who support Israel. That doesn't meet the question this evening, which is, do Trump's policies generally violate civil liberties? And we keep coming back to Ozturk and Khalil, Ozturk and Khalil. And, you know, the original topic of the debate was going to be just Mahmoud Khalil, but we changed it so that it's broader. And yet we're still just talking mostly about Mahmoud Khalil. So I would again emphasize that under our constitutional structure, if, you know, Congress was aware, people were aware, and made noise about how, ooh, Trump might use the Alien Enemies Act, but did Congress do anything to repeal it, limit it, amend it, anything? No, they did not, and they could have. Did they do anything to amend the Immigration and Nationality Act to protect against some of these things? No. Even, you know, Marco Rubio's statements, there is that provision in the statute that allows the Secretary of State to make that determination. Now, we can challenge that in court. We can take it to court and challenge that. But again, it's in the statute. It is not made up out of whole cloth by Donald Trump by himself. I will note, although I don't have the details with me, that I read a law review article from 2011 detailing hundreds, in fact, tens of thousands of erroneous removals over time, including removals of U.S. citizens. So again, I want to emphasize this is not unique to Trump. We don't like him, fine. You hate him, you think he's a bigot, you whatever it is about Trump, but set the man aside. Set the personal feelings about the man aside, because if we want to fix this, yelling at each other about Trump is going to get us absolutely nowhere. But if we focus on Congress, if we focus on reining in the administrative state, for example, Kilmar Abrego Garcia, we didn't talk much about him. He did have a withholding order in place. That is the last-ditch effort for relief from removal, and it is revocable. And I think what happened there is that because he had a valid order of removal, the order of removal is not vacated or revoked, it's still valid. Some bureaucrat somewhere didn't add the withholding order into the system, and so the ICE agent only had a valid deportation order in front of him. And that is an administrative state problem, not a Trump problem, not a Trump immigration policy problem. If you want to fix immigration in this country, you have to take it to Congress. They are the only ones who can solve any of this. I'm sorry, I know it's kind of a hopeless case, but that is where the problem lies. The problem lies in the outdated statutes, not in the enforcement of outdated statutes.
Thank you. Yeah. Okay. Lucas, please open the final vote. Yes, no, or undecided. President Trump's deportation policies generally violate key civil liberties as set forth in the U.S. Constitution. If you voted the first time, please vote the second time. I have in my hand the Soul Forum Tootsie Roll that goes to the winner of this debate.
I really like Tootsie Rolls, y'all.
Well, okay. We'll see if you get it. We're in suspense. This is, of course, the most dramatic moment of the evening. Who gets the Tootsie Roll? And I hope you're voting again, yes, no, or undecided. Again, both debaters have consented to come to the after party. They can follow me, although I'm a little slow-moving guy on my cane. I know a number of you have already been there at 55 Great Jones Street, a one-story walk-up, and where the food and the wine and the merriment and the intellectual exchange is waiting for you if you have a ticket, and I know, of course, that many of you do. So please come to the party if you have a ticket. While you're voting, I also want to announce that, of course, the Soul Forum is going to start its 10th year of running monthly debates. Thank you. And we're going to start on a kind of a down note. It's going to be September 15th, and the resolution will read much shorter resolution than this one this time. Paying for sex should be a crime. That will be the resolution defended by Melanie Thompson and opposed by Caitlin Bailey. October 21st, we'll have a slightly longer worded resolution, which reads as follows. The failure of Oregon's experiment in decriminalization of all drugs is compelling evidence that other attempts at complete decriminalization will fail just as badly. And that will be actually opposed by a Reason guy. And again, all our debates are 1 versus 1. I don't especially believe in 2 versus 2. And of course, as Glenn was saying, there may often way too many sound bites in too many debates and way too many mutual interruptions. I want to commend both debaters on their courtesy toward each other. I think they both won in that regard. Lucas, where do we stand with the resolution? I think he's coming to the stage to give me the person. I think that the one thing that we can all agree about is that if you need an immigration lawyer, you should call up Anna Gorisch. That we can all agree about. Okay, and then it turns out that the yes vote defended by Glenn Greenwald went from 49.6% of the vote to 62%. He picked up 12.8 percentage points. That's the number to beat. the no vote, defended by Anna, went from 15 to 25%. It picked up 9.9%. I have to say that was extremely close. However, for the third time in a row, actually, the Tootsie Roll goes to Glenn Greenwald. So please come, 55 Great Jones Street. Follow the crowds. It's 2 blocks uptown. Please don't get lost.